Okay, so we have gotten through the biology part, and we're going to sort of shift gears here to wrap up Unit 2 over these next two lectures. And we're going to talk about the nature versus nurture. Something you're always going to hear me talk about in this class is the nature versus nurture issue. How much of us is pre-wired? How much are we naturally? Where we're born, this is our DNA, and because of this DNA, it's who we become. That is nature, who we naturally are, versus nurture, which is people taking care of us, our environment, our experiences, how we are raised. That is the nurturing that we receive. So, in the nature versus nurture argument today, we're going to focus a little bit more on the nature than the nurture. The next lecture, we'll take a look at the nurturing aspect of it. So, with that in mind, just some questions to consider. And again, if you have me in class, I'll go over these questions live. You may want to fast forward through this part, but just some ethical questions. If you're on a boat, the boat overturns, it contains your 5-year-old and your 1-year-old child, both the same sex, 2 boys, 2 girls. The boat sinks and you can only save one. Whom do you choose? And it's just sort of a philosophical question for a lot of people. Would you save the 2-year-old? I'm sorry, would you save the 1-year-old, or would you save the 5-year-old? And a lot of people will sometimes choose to save the 5-year-old because there's more of a bond with it. Some will choose to save the 1-year-old because the 1-year-old seems more helpless or hopeless or whatever the case may be. And maybe there's a little bit more of a draw to that. And it's just in class, we get a little bit more into it. Would you rather marry someone older or younger than yourself? This question asked to girls, more likely to say older, asked to men, more likely to say younger. Because with men, it's more about health, as I talked about before, being able to have children. Versus women, it's more about a protector who's going to mourn more for the death of the child, the father, or the mother. And it is usually the mother. And the reason that it is the mother, it's not that the father doesn't care. It's just that the mother has a more limited opportunity to have children. You get 1 egg a month over about a 30 year window. And then that's it. Whereas guys can have children up into their 70s. So there's not as much of a window, and there could be multiple women pregnant at the same time. And another term you're going to hear me say again and again and again is the fact that, uh, eggs are precious, sperm are cheap. Really is how it comes down to it. Um, Also, when we take a look at this idea of how we've evolved, and again, these are just general sort of questions here, as we take a look at evolutionary psychology, women are more color sensitive than men. And that's just the fact that there is a lower percentage of women who are colorblind than men. There's about 10% of men who are colorblind. I think it's 2% of women. So the question is why? Why are women less likely to have color blindness? Why are they more sensitive to color? That when I go to Home Depot and my wife says, which one of these shades of yellow do you like? And I go, they're both yellow. You see here the spectrum that women pick up in colors versus what men pick up. We don't have as much in general. There are some men who are more color sensitive. There are some women who are less color sensitive. So the question becomes, well, why? Well, if you want to deal with the evolutionary perspective, a theory of this goes back to caveman days. And what caveman days basically say is, as the man went out and hunted, the woman was responsible for gathering, specifically gathering berries. And if you could not tell the proper shades of colors of a particular berry, you wouldn't know whether it was ripe and ready to eat, or even if it was poisonous. And if you were someone who couldn't pick out the reds and the greens and because of color blindness or whatever, you were going to pick poisonous berries. Your family was going to die. Those DNAs do not go forward. So as a result, women are less likely to be colorblind because those who were, their family did not go forward. Why are men less likely to ask for directions? And again, it isn't out of a basis of ignorance. It's because men tend to have a more internal compass. And this goes back to caveman days again, because it was the male's job to go out and hunt and gather. And once he was hunting, if he could not bring the hunt home, his family would die. Why are women more likely to remember a name or a face? Again, with evolutionary perspective, you go back, they're the nurturers from the early days. It's their responsibility to be in relationships with other families, to be in relationships with their children. That was their job, and therefore those genes get passed forward. Why are men more competitive? Resources were scarce early on. You know, if you don't compete and get the food, your family starves. So the only way that that man is going to be attractive is if he's competitive and can bring resources back. Why do men tend to grow facial hair to attract a mate, while most cosmetics are meant to make women's features brighter? And this is because darker features are seen as more masculine. The darker you are, the tall, dark, and handsome, versus the fair skinned beauty, where cosmetic companies, the cosmetics are designed to make your skin lighter than what it naturally is. Now, again, this doesn't mean that a white person is more attractive than a black person, but what this means is that white people, when they use cosmetics, it tends to make them a little bit brighter. And even dark skin, it tends to make it a little bit more fair, which is ironic because we also look at a tan as healthy. So a little bit of weirdness going on there. Why do men use fewer words and have better focus? Because it wasn't their job to communicate as much. So therefore, men develop less words. We have more left brain development. Women tend to be better listeners and are more empathetic because they have more right brain development. And this left and right brain development has evolved over years because of the roles and expectations of these genders. Right or wrong, that's what they are. And there you go. You got some more differences with the more, stuff here between men and women, if you want to take a look at some of those statistics. I just noticed here a little cartoon flipping people off. That's kind of rude. So as we go forward here, flash your way through, pause on it if you like. Here we go. So when we take a look at evolutionary psychology, this is the study of evolution of behavior using the principles of natural selection. The attractive traits move forward. The unattractive traits do not. The fact that when you look at men are taller today. The average height of a man today is about 5'10". Average height of a man back during Revolutionary War is 5'7". So Americans have become taller. So the question becomes, well, why are we taller? Is it a gravitational pull? Is the Earth spinning faster? Why are we taller people? And it's because being taller is a more desirable trait. It's a more desirable trait. It's tall, dark, and handsome. And as a result, guys with a little bit of an inch in height are going to be looked at as a little bit more attractive. As a matter of fact, there are dating apps that have algorithms about how much extra a man would have to make per year to make up for each inch in height that he may be lacking. Now, again, it's not the only trait, but it is looked at as a positive trait. And therefore, giving taller men an advantage, they're going to pass on the taller DNA and it's going to move forward. So men have gotten taller and as a result, pass on that DNA. Women have gotten a little bit taller as well, but not at the same rate. So again, when we look at the evolutionary psychology perspective, there's a couple of things when it comes to natural selection, then there's sexual selection. Natural selection are traits that are good for the species survival, good health, foraging skills, to avoid predators, all these sort of things. There's this anxiety as part of natural selection because when you have anxiety, you're less likely to be a risk taker. When women check out men from behind, they're looking for this V shape, the broad shoulders and then the smaller waist, because that's looked at as a protector. They're not looking for the good sperm. They're looking for this sort of natural selection of a protector. You're looking for the big horns that are on here. Well, there's a little bit of a trick with those big horns because those look attractive, but you're also looking at traits for reproduction. The large sheep horns are attractive, they're dominant, but ultimately they're less healthy. They're taxing on the metabolic system, and as a result, those sheep don't live as long, so it's harder for them to pass their DNA on. We may like the bad boy, bad girl because they're exciting, but due to them taking needless risks, their ability to reproduce is actually less. It's less likely. to happen. So when it comes to attitudes about sex, we look at results of studies and just some basic fill in the blanks here. 80% of adult bookstore customers are what? Men or women. And again, this is just people that shop at a porn shop. And if I said 80% of them, would you guess are men or women? Most would say men. 53% of college blank and 30% of college blank agreed that it was okay for two people to have sex. They really liked each other, even if they didn't know each other that long. What's the bigger number? Boys versus girls. Of course, it's the bigger number. So why do we know this answer to be true? Why do we hear story after story after story and see movie after movie after movie of guys bragging about sexual exploits and girls being ashamed of those same particular events? Not that either one is right or wrong, but why do we fall into those traits? And generally it's looked at as that guys are looked at as dominant and girls are looked at as less pure, if you would. Whether that's right or wrong is a very debatable topic. But in survey after survey, men have claimed to have had more sex with more women, up to 5 times more than women claim about men. Well, the math just doesn't add up. And again, this goes back to societal sort of expectations, which, by the way, are completely messed up when you think about it, because again, this idea of conquest of men, where it's about having a relationship and all these other things, and it was about women and shame of who they are, that doesn't make sense either. But we see this with homosexuals as well. Gay men are more into casual relationships, put more of an emphasis on physical attractiveness and physical stimuli than lesbians do. So it's not so much a sexual thing or even a sexuality thing. It's a gender thing. And the conclusion here basically is that men and women are different. Have to sneeze. Excuse me. Pardon me there. But there's a difference between the two. So the danger is when a guy is, by the way, when I sneeze there, how many of you in your mind actually had a bless you thing? Well, that's a cultural thing that we got going on. So the danger is when a guy is just kidding to a woman, it could be seen as sexual harassment. And the changing norms of Me Too, we're seeing this more and more and more. I mean, can a man be sexually harassed? Of course he can. But he's less likely to come forward because we think as a guy, he can protect himself. And we see this in study after study after study of juvenile boys who have been victims of sexual assault from parents, step-parents, whatever, that when it was a boy, the police or authorities were less likely to come in and help because they're boys. They could take care of themselves. A boy can't be raped. Of course he can. Absolutely he can. And sad to say, prisons are full of young men who were victims of sexual assault who cried out for help and nobody came because they thought you're a boy, you can handle it, you can take care of yourself. Okay, if a woman was a victim, then the authorities be there right away, or much sooner than they would for the guys. Women, on the other hand, also have to be careful about things like the message they send with their clothes. Think of how many of you girls have been leaving on a Friday night, and before you leave, your mother's like, whoa, come in here. No, you're not wearing that outfit. You're not going out and sending that message. You don't hear that from guys. I've got 5 sons. I have never once stopped any of them at the door and say, whoa, no, you button up that shirt. You those are tight jeans. You put your loose jeans on. You go out there, and women are just going to expect one thing from you. I've never had that conversation. Yet my wife has had that conversation with her daughters. She has had that conversation. So again, it's sometimes, is it truly what we are, or is it societal expectations that are sort of ruling our behavior? So when it comes to what men and women are looking for, and again, these are in cultural studies. This isn't just in America. These are cross-cultural studies around the world. But what we basically have seen is that men are looking more for healthy and fertile appearing, whereas women, the healthy and appearing is more of the protector. Guys look for youth, women look for maturity. Guys are more likely to look for a casual relationship, women more likely for a long-term relationship. Now, again, we are talking about general trends. Are there some women who are more attracted to a pretty face? Yes. Are there some guys who like a woman who's a little bit older? Of course. Are there some guys who love long-term relationships? Yes. Are there some women that just like to go from guy to guy in short term? Yes. But what we're talking about when we talk about psychology is we're talking about general trends that we see. So again, what is the evolutionary explanation for this? It's that sperm are cheap. Eggs are precious. Men can impregnate many women at the same time. And if it doesn't work out with one, it could work out with another, and you just play the odds. Women, a little bit more committed. You nurse that single child, you know, and it's part of you and all these other things. So as a result, men and women do look for different things as we're sending our genes out into the future. Now, there are critics of this. And the critic would basically say, is this really what we think? Or are we going with societal expectations? Could be a little bit of both. With these accepted norms, it discourages people from thinking outside the box. And truly, we're more alike than we are different, as we saw with those 18 characteristics, men and women, very similar towards the top. So when we look at questions of evolutionary psychology, we look at issues of why infants start to fear stranger by the time they become mobile, because by the time they become mobile, they're not just surrounded by their parents and they start to recognize, oh, these people are different. Why do your parents feel that you're special? And they do. It's because your victories are their victories. Your failures are their failures, the mirror neurons and everything else going on, because you're taking their name and pushing it forward. Of course, they think you're special, and you are special to them, but to everybody else, you're traffic. And so sometimes that can affect a kid. You know, you sit there and you get that failing grade or whatever, well, I'm special. You're traffic. You know, so sometimes when the parents put too much praise and heap too much on a kid, the reality can sometimes be a little bit of a wet blanket. Why do we have phobias about spiders and snakes, but not about guns and electricity? Guns and electricity are far more dangerous, but we think we can control guns and electricity. I come over here, turn it off, turn it on. I can control electricity, but I can't control a little snake coming up here and just right up out of nowhere. I can't control that. I can't control going to sleep with a spider and right in my mouth. I can't control that. But they're not as dangerous. So it's perceived control. Why do we display greater empathy and helpfulness towards those who look, think, and act as we do? Because we think they're part of our tribe. When people look like me, when people act like me, there's an assumption that they are part of me. And I bond with them. You know, if I'm somebody who's driving around a broken down car and I see somebody on the side of the road in a broken down car, I'm more likely to pull over and help that person. Why? Because I know what it's like. I can empathize them. I'm a struggler. They're a struggler. We help strugglers out. You're one of me. But if I'm driving around in a broken down car and I see a guy on the side of the road in a Mercedes, screw him. He's got a Mercedes. He's got AAA, whatever. And at the same time, if I'm a guy driving down the road in a Mercedes and I see a guy in a piece of trash car broken down on the side of the road, I should have stayed in school. You're not part of my group. You're not part of my group. And again, this is this implicit bias that we have, which we'll talk about here more down the road. We divide ourselves up by category. I'm a guy and guys do this. I'm a woman and women do this. I'm a child, you're a grown up, you're old, you don't understand, boomer. You know, all these things that we do, and we divide ourselves. And we do this naturally because there is not just the protection of the group, but there's the empathy of the group. If I go to the cafeteria and I take a look down, I don't care what high school it is, I'll see tables of just Black students. I'll see tables of just white students. I'll see tables of just Asian students. I'll see tables of just Hispanic students. And it's not because Jim Crow is active in the 21st century. It's because we like to hang around with people who are like this. Attractive people hang around. If I'm an unattractive person, I'm not going to hang around beautiful people. You know, they don't know what it's like to have to develop a sense of humor, work for attention, and all these other things. If I'm poor, I'm not going to hang around rich people. Make me feel bad about myself. They're all spending $2,000 for VIP Katy Perry tickets and I'm smelling like McNuggets. You know, they don't know my struggle. We're going to hang around with people who speak our language. Jocks are going to hang around jocks. Cadets are going to hang around cadets. Choir people are going to hang around choir people. You work at Chick-fil-A, you're going to hang around with other people who work at Chick-fil-A who also have to say that everything is a pleasure to serve you. you want to hang around with folks like you. And as a result, that becomes your in group, and that impacts how we think and move forward. Do you have a star on your belly or not? So when we look at the nature versus nurture debate, we're looking at how much is pre-wired to turn out in a certain way and how much of us is the sum of our life experiences. So again, what are we born with, the nature, versus what are we experiencing, which is the nurture. And again, a lot of this depends on which part of psychology you practice. Some people are very heavy nature, biological, evolutionary psychologists that we're talking about here, believe that you were born and destined to be whatever, and with these particular traits, that's going to impact who you are. There are some people that are heavy nurture. We talked about that before with John Watson. Give me any child, and through behaviors and rewards and punishments and everything else, I'll make them the next great whatever. And the general rule is that it tends to even out to about 50-50. Half of who we are is pre-wired. Half of who we are is our environment. Intelligence, it's more 70-30 with pre-wiring. But for most of what we are, half of who we are, it's the result of I was born this way. And the other half is the environment that I am in. But what we're going to see is the way you're born impacts your environment. And your environment impacts the material that we have. It's kind of weird. So these genes that we have, these biochemical units of hereditary, they make up our chromosome. 99.9% of our DNA is just like every other person on the planet. The only 0.1% difference is height, illness, disease, race, susceptibility towards depression, all these other things. We're pre-wired at birth with this genetic code, but we're so much like one another. As a matter of fact, 98% of our genetic DNA is just like a chimpanzee. 96% is like a monkey, 75% is like a dog. You know, we're very, very similar to these particular things. Look at my puppy right over here. She's 75% like me. Come here, Stevie. Stevie, come here. Come here, Stevie. Stevie, come here. Come here. Come here. Here you go. This little animal right here. Come here. Here you go. This is 75% like me. We both got two eyes. We both got a nose. We both got a mouth. We both got teeth. We got teeth. Okay. We both have the capacity to love. We both have loyalty. I don't have this fur that she has. I don't have the paws that she has. I have opposable thumb. But 75% of our genetic code is exactly the same. It's exactly the same. We get goosebumps. You get excited, you get goosebumps. You get chills, you get goosebumps. So do cats. It's like when cats, the hair stands up, animals, the hair stands up, it's a warning sign to other animals about arousal, about whatever. We get that from them. 70 to 80% of our height is genetic, but only 40 to 60% of our personality is genetic. So again, there's a lot of these things that come around that we can't quite tie to. Chromosomes, DNA. I'm not a biologist. I don't want to get into that, but this is the biological blueprint that affects our psychology, where we go with natural selection. The principle that amongst the range of inherited trait variations, those that are better for survival are more likely to be passed on, the more attractive traits. When you take a look at this, and dark skin is more attractive than light skin because of the ability to absorb whatever. And as a result, the more light-skinned people are more likely to die off. You're going to have more dark skin, and that's going to be more attractive. The fact that a longer neck is going to be able to eat and the shorter neck is not, the shorter neck's going to die off. The fact that the lighter-skinned rats here are more, you can see them more by their predator. You're going to get eaten more than the darker-skinned ones, so you're going to have more darker-skinned rats. So this is the idea of natural selection. The attractive traits will move forward. It's why we're nicer than what we were 120 years ago, is because, you know, mean people are less likely to reproduce, and we have more selection than what we've ever had before. It used to be the only people you had to select from were the people that lived around you, and now you have a much greater number of people to select from. So the 3 steps of evolution are certain biological traits are inherited by genetic means. Mutations are made by things that are looked at as more attractive. And then some variants confer more fitness than others do. And those with these new and improved genes are deemed more attractive, so their traits are more likely to be passed on. What is attractive in 2021 when I'm making this video right now is not the same thing that was attractive in 1921. You know, you didn't look at someone and go, oh, they've got computer programming ability, they're going to make a lot of money. We weren't worried about a computer programmer in 1921, or even intelligence necessarily in 1921. You need somebody stronger with brawn, muscle, whatever to protect you. And that's not necessarily the case anymore, if at all. You know, women don't necessarily need a man to protect them. You know, you think about it, you don't need a man to hunt and get you want to protect yourself, you get ADT to protect your home. You know, you get a little gun in your purse, whatever, that will protect you. You go to, you know, you want to hunt and gather, you get a paycheck, you go to HEB, you've hunted, you've gathered. So again, and this also gets to this evolvement of where we are now of what is the role of men, what is the role of women, and where women don't even necessarily even go to a sperm bank. You know, so we're seeing this massive change in the last 30, 40, 50 years of the roles of men and women. And it's been quite fascinating to study in psychology, where a lot of people are nervous about these changes, want to go back to the way it was before. Biological preparedness, there's certain phobias that are more likely than others, snakes, heights, wild animals, due to them being passed on to help ensure the survival of the species. Those people who took less risks were more likely to survive for their genetics. So is there any reason that we have more anxiety, we have more phobias in 2021 than we did in 1921? Women may be attracted to risk takers or dangerous guys when young, but eventually they want to marry someone who offers security to their offspring. So we see these mutations where suddenly intelligence, a sense of humor, is looked at as more attractive than maybe it was 100 years ago. And it's resulting in different folks. Okay, intelligence and success have become more desirable traits in men recently as opposed to physical size and strength, as has the earning potential of women become more attractive to men than what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. The idea that the woman could make more money. My wife makes more money than I do. Fantastic. It's amazing. Some guys would see that as a threat. So when we study genetics, when we look at behavioral genetics, one thing to look at is twin studies. Identical twins are developed from a single, let me get myself out of the way here. You've got a single sperm hit single egg, divide, you get the exact same identical child. Fraternal twins are just, happens to be two eggs in there, two different sperm hits, two different eggs. Those are fraternal twins, separate zygotes. So they could be the same sex, they could be opposite sex. But when we study twin studies, what's amazing about these is that identical twins are much more likely to share similar characteristics, even when separated at birth. They show biological components for IQ, schizophrenia, ADHD, autism, depression, bipolar, alcoholism, gambling, attitude towards authority, levels of cooperation, risk, even homophobia when they were separated at birth. Now, again, as younger 3, 5, 7, 9-year-olds are going to be very similar to their adoptive parents, but as they become 21, 25-year-olds, they become more similar to the identical twin they were with before. And we see this with intelligence. You're more likely, the identical twin is more likely to be like one another than the fraternal twins raised together are. Personality, more likely. So adoption can have an impact, but the pre-wiring can sometimes override this. There was a study of twins that were born in 1933. So this is the rise of Hitler. And you had a mother and a father who were married, but the mother was Jewish and the father was very Germanic, and it led to a divorce. And she went away to, I think, Switzerland or something. And then 20 years later, they get these boys back together. And this boy was raised in a kibbutz, I think is what he was raised in, with a Jewish family, very Orthodox Jew. And the young boy, as a young boy, he joined Hitler Youth, you know, as a 7, 8-year-old. So he's very much into that. So these boys in their 20s are asked to come back together and really didn't want to meet each other. But once they met each other, there were the weirdest things that they had in common. Things like they both flushed the toilet before they went to the bathroom. That weird little habits like that. Their intelligence, all these other things that even though they were raised completely separated, you know, one an Orthodox Jew, one part of Hitler Youth, but because of their same DNA, very similar. There's a great documentary that was on CNN called Three Identical Strangers. I think it's on Netflix now, about these 3 guys who were separated at birth, which again, these are terrible studies to do. Separate brothers, keep them together. Separate sisters, keep them together. But these brothers were not only separated at birth, but this adoption agency adopted one of them to a lower class family, one to a middle working class family, and one to a wealthy family. And that wasn't by coincidence, because then these boys were visited every 6 months by doctors who were taking data on them. And they got amazing data from these studies. But it's really kind of messed up to do these to families, to take people's brothers and sisters away from them. It's really bad. So when we talk about heritability, we're talking about the proportion of variation amongst individuals. Now, heritability would increase if you were had similar environments. Okay, if I'm raised in the same family, the genetic things that I share with a brother or sister are going to be greater if we also have the same environment. But we don't always have the same environment. You know, even though you have the same parents as your brothers and sisters, you don't really have the same parents. If you are the oldest child, you were raised by new parents. If you are the youngest child, you are raised by more experienced parents, and also probably raised more by your siblings than the oldest child was, who had no siblings at that time to take care of them. So even though you go, well, we grew, and your parents were probably, you know, had less money for the older children, and the young, you know, the older children always complains about the youngest child. They're spoiled. They get everything because the parents are in a different socioeconomic setting than what they were 5, 10, 15 years ago. Okay, so if all people had similar hereditaries but were raised drastically different, this would decrease in proportion. But we're also not all raised with the same schools and the same families and the same neighborhoods and everything else. So again, differences between groups are due almost entirely to the environment. You know, when you take a look at these, the same seeds are put in poor soil, fertile soil. There's a variety, but again, the soil makes a difference, but it's still the same plant. It's still the same plant. So heritability can't explain everything. People are taller and heavier than they were 200 years ago, but what do genes have to do with humans wearing earrings and not monkeys? Nothing. Yet genes are predictors of humans wearing earrings. If you have the double X versus the XY chromosome, whether or not you wear earrings, most every girl wears an earring. Far fewer guys wear an earring. So whether you have the X or the Y chromosome is a predictor of wearing an earring. But the X or the Y chromosome is not a predictor of a monkey wearing an earring. So again, the nature that we are affects our nurture. If we are born with athletic DNA to an athletic family, you know, well, not only do I get this athletic DNA, but the athletic family is probably going to feed me better. It's going to probably get me more involved in sports and everything else. But if I'm born into a family that is more sedentary, and I'm born with extra fat cells, I'm probably also not going to be as active and probably playing video games and drinking soda all the time. So what my nature is going to impact my nurture. If I'm a child that's born with a sweet temperament, a happy baby, happy temperament, I'm going to get more love. Oh, I want to hold a happy baby. But if I'm born a whiny baby, I'm going to get less love. I'm going to get less attention. I'm going to get bad attention. So who we are impacts our environment as much as our environment impacts who we are. So what are the effects of gene on some behavior? Well, it depends on the environment. What are the effects of environment? Well, it depends on the gene. And you're going to hear this all the time. This is a trick when you take a test in psychology. Pretty much every question that I ever ask you on a test in psychology, you could answer with the phrase, well, it depends. Well, it depends is probably the most accurate answer you could ever give. Okay. For example, take a look at Jacob and Noah here. You got identical twins born with the exact same DNA. They absorb fats twice as much as the average person. Jacob eats healthy, low-fat food. Noah eats fatty, unhealthy food. Even though they have the same DNA, because their environment's different, their bodies are going to be different. But having certain DNA is also going to affect how the environment hits us. I'll give you a couple of examples here. High levels of a gene called MAOA produce elevated levels of serotonin, and it can triple the chance that the carrier will be diagnosed with depression. If you got high levels of MAOA, it could triple the chance that you'll be diagnosed with depression, but only if you experience a history of child abuse. If there's no child abuse in your family, no more likelihood that you're going to get depression. But if you have childhood abuse in your family and the MAOA gene, it's going to triple the chance that you're going to have depression. Low levels of MAOA increase the likelihood of criminal behavior. Low levels increases the likelihood of criminal behavior, but only if you have mutually high levels of testosterone. If if you do not have high levels of testosterone, the levels of MAOA you have, it's irrelevant. The number of older brothers a boy has can increase the odds that he grows up identifying as homosexual. And I know that goes against everything that we believe, because you would think, well, the more older brothers I have, the more masculinity that's around me, the less likely I am to be homosexual, when it's actually the opposite. The reason why is because the more boys that a woman has, when a woman has that first boy testosterone in her, you know, she reacts with a bunch of estrogen and he defends with a bunch of testosterone. So older brothers tend to have higher levels of testosterone than younger brothers do. And then as the woman gets used to that, and she doesn't produce as much, and he doesn't have to defend as much, there's lower levels of testosterone, which can sometimes affect homosexuality. So each successive boy, the odds go up a little bit by about 50%. So instead of a 2% chance, you have a 3% chance. Instead of a 3% chance, it becomes a 4.5% chance, blah, 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 blah. They go up unless he's left-handed. Left-handed has no impact. Number of older brothers, irrelevant. Only if you're right-handed. So again, the nature-nurture argument is really sort of tricky here. Temperament, last thing that we're going to cover here. A person's characteristic emotional reactivity and intensity. Difficult babies are going to get a difficult environment. Easy babies are going to get an easy environment. And who we are at 5 can affect us at 15, 20, 25. And this study was shown in what was called the marshmallow study. The marshmallow study is where they gave a group of kids a marshmallow. And they basically gave them this sort of statement. Here's a marshmallow. You can eat the marshmallow now. Enjoy it. Or if you wait, I'll be back. And if you wait, I'll give you a second marshmallow. Okay? One marshmallow now. Or if you wait, you'll have a second marshmallow. Those that have 5 waited were more likely to have successful lives than those who waited right away. Those who waited at 5 and showed that patience that I'll get a greater reward later were kids who were less likely to do drugs, were kids who were more likely to do better in school, were kids who were less likely to get into credit card debt, less likely to go to jail, because that patience, that waiting for that long-term reward at 5 was a predictor of actions at 5, at 15, at 20, at 25. The kid who's loved at 5, the loving 5-year-old becomes the loving 15-year-old. Those who said that they would wait but didn't was a statistical predictor of violent crime as an adult. Why wait? You know, and kids who said, why wait, predicted adult property crime. All right. Now, when this study has been replicated, and when they looked deeper into it, it's a little bit different. Recent replication studies have put more of an emphasis on socioeconomic status, which may have affected the development. If you grew up as a poor kid, and you've had people in your life say, hey, if you wait, you'll get something more, and you never got something more, you go, well, screw it, I'm gonna eat my one marshmallow now, because I've been promised other things, but I never got those other things. I've been promised that Christmas was gonna be great, but I never got Christmas. So this measures more about reward response than it does willpower. A smoker would need more willpower to not smoke than a non-smoker would. So if you're someone who doesn't usually have marshmallows around, the idea of a second marshmallow is so outside the realm of possibility. Why would I even wait for that? Never measured the level of trust with a reinforcer. Never measured all these other things. So again, it's a good test. It's a longitudinal test. It's an interesting test. But it's not just about who we are. It's also about the environment that we grew up in. So when controlling for home, family, income status, this effect nearly disappeared. Okay, so that's what we took a look at here. We talked about that in the last lecture there, and some other stuff there if you want to take a look at that. So we talked about the nature part today. Next lecture, we will talk about nurture.